Welcome to week 3, where we will explore employee communication methods and practices. 3 chapters in the Dewhurst text, chapters 2, 3, and 4. The first chapter offers a framework for asking questions about the effectiveness and the efficiency of employee communication. Our focus is whether the communications functions is working on the right things and getting the right results from the organization. In other words, it's not just trying to figure out whether or not you're communicating how much activity there is. You can beware the barrenness of a busy day, right? You want to make sure that your communication efforts are focused on getting the right results. Now, often someone will ask a communicator for help. Well, what they really come with is a want. They want a communication output. They'll say, we need a video, or we need a pamphlet, or we need an infographic, or we need a new social media channel. They've already, rounded third base, headed towards home, and we need to start back at home before going to first base, to use a baseball analogy, and make sure we know where we're going and how to get there. And so oftentimes when I'm approached with someone who comes with a want, in other words, they've already decided what the most effective communication method is or tactic, I start asking some questions. Now, we got to be careful because, everybody's busy, and the last thing they want is for you to start, questioning their ideas. And so you're respectful that they have the ideas. You appreciate the fact that they thought enough of communication to bring that idea to you. You just want to give them, the most effective communication practice or the most effective communication tool or tactic, whatever that is. And you might preface it by saying, maybe we do need a video, but let's make sure before we, spend the time and the money and the effort that we understand, what goals we have, what objective we're trying to meet, and then let's decide what the most effective communication tool is to help us reach that. All right. Now, one of the chapters that we're going to read this week is entitled Understanding Your Audience. Let me say that again. Understanding your audience. Nothing in communication is more important than understanding your audience. You can be the most elegant you can be the most eloquent speaker, pun intended, I guess, or you can be the greatest writer, or any other type of communicator, right? But if it's not focused on what your audience needs, you might as well be talking into the wind, because it's not going to achieve whatever the desired effect is. This is the essence of effective communication. Make sure you understand your audience. It's been so since Aristotle, and it will continue to be so as long as humans communicate. Now, in Chapter 2 on page 25, review those pitfalls of conducting an employee communication audit. It'll save you some time and heartache if you learn some of the lessons that the author provides there. There's also an audit wheel in Figure 2.1. On page 52, Table 3.2, review that arrow framework. Your author goes into a lot of detail, and it's certainly worth reviewing. In the interest of time, I'm not going to delve into that for this particular video. All right, moving into our other text, section 2, pages 32 through 69. Your author talks about how there's no such thing as a boilerplate communication plan. I'm going to disagree just a bit, because I use boilerplates or templates or whatever words you want to use, and I think they're quite effective. Now, I understand the intent. In other words, you can't just cookie cutter. You can't just pick up this template that worked for this communication effort and stamp it over here and expect it to work every time. That obviously doesn't work. But the idea that you can't use a template, I just want to make sure I clarify that, because they're very helpful. We offer some templates in this course and other courses, and when I teach communication or train communicators or even leaders about communication, we use a lot of templates because it can be kind of daunting, especially for someone who doesn't have a lot of communication experience or maybe even any education in the communication field. You tell somebody to develop a communication plan and their eyes might gloss over, or they feel a little overwhelmed and they become paralyzed. They don't know where to start. But if you hand them a template and say, here, fill this in, with some questions that they can answer, It makes it a whole lot easier. Okay. I also like where your author talks about employee communication is not a newsletter. I hear it all the time. I serve on the board of some nonprofits, and one nonprofit that I recently joined, and of course was asked to serve as the public relations director, which is a role, of course, I'm happy to fill. It's an area where I have quite a bit of experience, but more importantly, it's something I actually enjoy. And the very first word out of the president was, "We need to get our newsletter started again." And I smiled and remained silent because, of course, I was brand new. It was my first meeting. But back to the discussion we had, people they came with a want, as opposed to, here's the objective. Now you as the communicator just help us describe or find what that communication tool is. Turns out, we probably do want some sort of newsletter, but it's probably not going to be what they had before. They had one before 4 times a year. I think it was a 6 or an 8 pager, which is a long newsletter in today's age to get someone to read that. And it required a lot of work, and so it died, of course. I mean, these are, we're all doing this out of the goodness of our heart and in the capacity of our time, and so, and it required a lot of input from the different directors on the board, and that's just asking a lot. So we're going to find a way to get the communication objective met in something kind of like a newsletter. Anyway, you probably had similar experiences in your work or perhaps in some of the volunteer organizations that you serve. The idea is that, you reach people where they are, and we know that people today are busy. And we know that, people who serve on boards or working in organizations, they're busy as well. So again, you got to understand your audience. That's where it all begins. That's where all efforts should be focused, and find the most effective communication tool. All right, one of the things your author provides is this approach, the idea that the default approach should always be face-to-face communication. Now, I don't like that word always. If we've learned nothing during the pandemic, it's that we can be effective in ways other than face-to-face. But again, the point is still valid. If possible, and you can do face-to-face, there's no richer form of communication. We may have time later in the course to talk about the communication richness theory. If not, you can look that up on your own. But, up on the top right, the richest form of communication is face-to-face, that eye-to-eye in the same room, getting all the nonverbals, getting tone and intonation and inclination and, facial expressions, all those things that make up communication. No better way to do that than face-to-face. But it's not always possible. And there are other avenues that can be just as effective depending upon audience, depending upon message, and depending upon your desired outcome. Now, segueing into that, what if you're not able to meet face-to-face? There are still ways to, keep your audience engaged, keep your employees engaged. And I think I might have shared with you before, but I'll expand upon it in this discussion. During the early days of the pandemic, when we were still trying to, everybody went home, we all started working from home, we were struggling with this technology, and some of us were familiar with the video calls. We started out, I think, with Zoom. We went to Teams. I think we settled on Google Meet. But it was just kind of a chaos, right? But lo and behold, we still got the mission done, right? And our commander, she was very adept at meeting people where they were. And so she understood that while our output, our production, it wasn't going to be what it was before, primarily because a lot of what we do requires, travel, meeting people face to face. That's just not happening in a global pandemic. But she was also concerned that, we'll work through the technical challenges. And she always told us that, be patient with yourself, be patient with technology. It's not about that. We still need to maintain our relationships as a family. And so she would often, we had twice a week calls for department heads and then once a week all hand calls. And we would brief her on the mission. She would usually, almost every meeting, ask questions that had nothing to do with the mission. It was questions that were completely off topic about us, right? Her focus, she knew we were going to do the mission. She trusted us to do that. She was focused on the people. And so she would ask, what's your favorite music? What book are you reading? When we're through all this, what's the first place you're going to visit? And so, in other words, she was helping us get through that, and it meant a lot. I told her when she departed that I thought she was the perfect commander for us at that time, and we were thankful to have her. Now, she left about halfway through the pandemic. She retired from the Navy after 30 years of service. We got a new commander in, and we had started going back to the office. Things started opening up a little bit. And so he was looking for ways to get us together face to face, but to do it safely. We were still under some restrictions in terms of the number of people who could be in the office, but we could do outdoor things. And so one of the things he introduced was the frisbee golf. And so, you can get together, you can maintain your 6 feet distance, you're outside, so it's safe. And so we did that. And it's something just about everyone can do. And then we would have a meal afterwards in a safe environment. I think the first time we brought our own meals. We didn't want to share food at the time. We just did one not too long ago. We're back in the office almost full time. We did the frisbee golf, but then we did a meal to share, right? So he brought in all the hamburgers and the hot dogs, and we had a vegan option, of course. And then we shared that because we're at that point where we can do that. But I think it's a good example of how you keep employees engaged. And employees will never forget that. I know I won't. We're always going to remember what our leaders did to help us. We're not going to remember the day-to-day tasks. Those are going to be done and move on. And it's part of our history that we're probably never going to remember. But we will remember those leaders who cared enough to engage us where we needed to be. All right, that's enough for this week. As always, I will encourage you to stay ahead with your assignments, stay engaged in the discussion board, and of course, always enjoy your time of learning.